where you are going. So we have, so like if Dominic is sitting here, then we have Lisa there, then you can come into the middle.
Okay.
With Christine there, and then people to see.
Just getting exactly.
So good morning, we are getting ready. We do have headsets. I don't know if it's still early morning, right? But if you want them, we can test whatever feels better. But usually if it's filling up soon, then it maybe use the headsets. And we are getting ready in a minute. And you can bring a +1 or a +2 even this morning, guys. So you're the brave ones who made it. We were wondering what day is today. It's Thursday. It's investment day, trade day, finance day. And here we are. So let's come in and let's get us started. Anyone wants to join supplier decarbonization who's passing by? Now is your time. No, you can. No. You're staying there. It's just more like getting us ready. So, welcome. My name is Alexander. I'm with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. We are a coalition partner in the Women Business Coalition. So huge thanks to Women Business that we can be here today, that we are hosted here today for our session. WBCSD is a member organization, businesses, 250 businesses, taking action on climate, nature, and equity. And today's topic couldn't be more important. It's on supplier decarbonization. We do all know, in terms of Scope 3 emissions, supplier emissions can be from 30 to 70%, depending on industry, even more of a company's Scope 3 emissions. So it's highly important that we do tackle those. We do run a couple of programs that we are going to introduce you in a minute. You see the flow of today's session here. We will have a bit of a, where do we stand? Is there a business case if you take action on supplier? And then we welcome a panel on stage from 3 companies sharing thoughts on where are we, what does it need to go further in terms of capability building, in terms of upskilling on supplier decarbonization. At WBCSD with our member companies, we have been working over the past 2 years on a digital decarbonization platform, the Climate Drive. We are going to introduce to you a new version that we have been working intensively over the past months. And then we come to a close. It's a 1-hour session, so great to have you here. Let's get us going. Initially, I would love to pass over to my colleague Dominic, EVP at WBCSD, on some opening remarks on what are the various initiatives that WBCSD is running around supplier decarbonization. So here's your challenge. It's 5 minutes, ingoing statement. You're up for it. 5 minutes, Dominic. Over to you.
All right, Alex. Yeah, the timeline is on TikTok. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Well done. It's Thursday of week 1 at COP. It's great to see you all. Rather brilliantly, that's the same jacket I'm wearing now as in that photo. So it's my 1 COP jacket, I think. Okay, so this is a great kind of conversation to have because good to see you at the back. How many of you are kind of working in a company and kind of scratching out your head about the supplier value chain piece? So I know our brilliant panelists and obviously Hitachi and over there. Anybody else? Okay, good. So the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, now at 252 companies, $9 trillion in revenue, leading companies with people like yourselves trying to tackle this challenge. We did a broad assessment with our friends from EY about the kind of global carbon footprint of that group. It's about 14.8 gigatons, about 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions. 88% of that is Scope 3. So number one is we are not alone as we're struggling through our own enterprise and our value chain on this topic. The second thing then is, of course, like what is the kind of common approach that we can start to take, and where are the best in class examples or practices or help in the different kind of sectors that we're in, or how is this going to work? And the third thing, of course, is the ecosystem is changing around us quite rapidly, both in terms of the regulatory structures and in terms of demands on us, not least demands being how choppy it's starting to get in terms of changing weather patterns or all these sorts of things. When we're coming to our boards, and it's the same for us, I mean, my board is equivalent of 20 CEOs, many representing you, who are saying, what are you going to do? And the language that one's starting to have to use is the language of either a CEO or a chief risk officer or a CFO, rather than a kind of whole bunch of sustainability words about double materiality or things. And that, I think, is the sort of changing nature of the game, because it's clear if we can put the challenge of the value chain and the scope 3 into, so you can sense that revenues are choppy, you can sense that risk is increasing, you can sense that there's actually a materiality financially as well as environmentally to the business, and here are things that we can do about that. Okay, well that sounds interesting. Tell me. The other thing which we're experiencing quite a lot is actually on the legal side. So with Chief Legal, okay, I get the fact that we have 1,000+ suppliers. I get the fact that there are other kind of companies in the space, maybe adjacent to us or maybe even in the same sector, but there's no way that we can perhaps play together in a collaborative sense as you were just describing, because I've got an antitrust issue I've got to deal with. So how does that work? And that is a really interesting one, because we can sense now the opportunity for like a green window in kind of antitrust, particularly in Europe, but also in other jurisdictions as well. I mean, Japan's been looking into this quite a lot, you know, through METI and Ministry of Environment. And so these things are starting to happen, which for us as sort of sustainability people, we're having to kind of suddenly be a bit more expert in legals, in finance, in procurement, and find the words to explain this and drive this through in a very different way from maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And that's kind of what is going on in the WBCSD and some of these offers. So we'll hear a little bit about this thing called the Climate Drive, which is basically a platform of all the best examples we can find from those 250 leading companies in the world about how people are tackling it, so that you're not alone and we can see, did you do it like that and how did that work? We have something called the Partnership for Carbon Transparency. Several of you are involved in that. That's a really cool one, because that is carbon product footprint can work. Carbon product footprint can work. Here's the methodology, and here's the data exchange platform, and actually those suppliers upstream find it cheap and effective, and when they are good at this, they win, because you can tell and they can tell that they are better than other suppliers. That's pretty interesting, because there's not a bunch of assumptions which we submit. It's actual data. And carbon product footprint then, with our friends from SAP or Salesforce, I don't know if either of you are in the room, but then you can become what they call pact compliant and pass that approach on to millions of other suppliers out there. So we sort of get to that tipping point stage on using that. We then have, of course, we've all experienced it, this idea of, that's all great, but if nobody's asking for this product, it's no good me working up the supply chain and hassling my suppliers and such if nobody wants to buy it. So the demand pull piece is key. We've had loads and loads of discussions with the companies in the club of WBCSD about, there's many buyers alliances out there. There's many kind of different ways of organizing contracts or guarantees or things. But what we don't have, again, is a place where, how does that work? How do we come together and share those best practices? Could you create a center for decarbonization demand acceleration? Can we just share how we do this? It's quite a tricky thing to navigate. Do I join that alliance? Do I join this thing? What contract would I use? I get the concept, but tell me how to do it. And so we launched that, and immediately we've had we launched that at New York Climate Week. We've got 35 of our members now involved with the idea of to have a little sprint through to Brazil and beyond to pull through. So upstream with the carbon product footprint, in the middle with you mostly, who are our large company members who would be sharing best practice examples and building experiences with each other, which we'll hear about through the Climate Drive. and downstream, if you like, with a pull on demand. So all of these things are kind of tackling that base question of how do I get this done? I get it, but how do I get it done? And how do I be able to report that back to my board, to my CEO, or to other kind of functions around the board on purchasing, on risk, on finance in a way that they understand? And that's kind of basically what we're doing. And it's working pretty well, I'd say. One of the largest kind of programs that we have at WBCSD is in fact in this climate piece. That's grown exponentially, I'd say, in the last 3 years in terms of the amount of people involved. And it's rather wonderful because it's cross-sector. So that chance to experience how people are navigating this from different parts of the economy and different geographies. So that's the space, and we'll hear a little bit more about the climate drive, I think, in this discussion, also from some other experts as well. So, Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Dominic. Perfectly in 5 minutes. Thank you. For those who just joined, so you have some headsets, so you may like to use them. There's not some cool music on it. It's more like just that you're able to understand what we are saying here up front. So CDP recently did some new research on supplier decarbonization together with HSBC. And also the question on, is there a business case on it? And we are very happy that we have Manvir, who has been leading this work as a senior manager at CDP, and who has given us another 5 minutes short impulse of what have been the key findings, and is there a business case for supplier decarbonization, and if yes, what would it be? Over to you, Manvir.
Got some notes here, so give it a good go. Thank you. Okay. So, supply chains. If you're here, you know they're important, or at least you're supply chain curious. Over the next few minutes, I'll share with you some of those data-driven insights that we've derived from a research project that was funded by HSBC. And really, it's about one of the most critical challenges of our time, decarbonizing supply chains. So let's start talking about the business case. This isn't just about sustainability. It's about driving tangible value for businesses whilst making a real impact on our planet. Now, we all know that supply chains account for a significant proportion of global emissions, but just how much? So when we take corporate emissions disclosed to CDP from 23,000 companies on average, we see that Scope 3 are on average 26 times the operational emissions. That is an average, and that varies per sector. But the question then becomes, how do we address supply chains at scale? Decarbonizing supply chains isn't just a moral imperative, it's a strategic opportunity. It's about boosting resilience, reducing risk, and creating competitive advantage. And how do we know that it's so important for a business's financial resilience? Well, there's a lot of stats. You can go into the report in more detail that we can share afterwards. But we've analyzed data that demonstrates that over $165 billion US in potential financial gains linked to climate-related opportunities have been disclosed by companies. That, crucially, is 8 times more than the amount needed to actually realize those opportunities. It makes sense to actually realize them. And the data shows us that the path to realizing these opportunities and driving supplier change is predicated upon capacity building. When we look at correlations, mind you, correlations between supply chain members that are requesting disclosure from, this is multinationals requesting disclosure from their suppliers through CDP's platform, we find that companies that actively engage with their suppliers to take climate action are cascading their ambitions. For example, suppliers that receive target setting support from buyers are 2.6 times more likely to set science-based reduction targets, emission reduction targets, I should say, than those who go it alone. So that's the business case for action from multinationals to support their suppliers. And when we invest in that capacity of the suppliers, we're investing in the future of our companies. But here's the challenge. We know supplier engagement at scale isn't easy. Suppliers face a real need for capacity building, tools, and training to meet their decarbonization goals. So that's why we're at this session today, to dive into concrete solutions to engage with suppliers, to empower them to make progress faster and with confidence. The opportunity here is enormous, but we need bold action and collaboration to unlock it. And in a moment, we'll hear from our industry leaders that are doing exactly that. Now, the data disclosed from, as I say, over 23,000 companies through CDP shows that disclosure creates a dialogue. And the most mature multinational buyers have engagement strategies that are all rooted in capacity building and extending through to solutions, collaboration with suppliers, and providing financial incentives for action. To show the impact of that, we find that suppliers collaborating with buyers in joint R&D of low carbon tech are 4.3 times more likely to be setting a science-based target for emission reductions. So capacity building is the gateway to those greatest tiers of action, of maturity in that engagement pipeline, and ultimately to supplier action at speed and scale. And with the tools, data, and support now at our fingertips, we have everything we need to turn goals into results. So as we begin, I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists about your successes and your learnings, because we know this isn't easy. How have you made the case for internal supplier engagement, and what's worked for you? Thank you.
Thank you. Where do people get the report? It's online. Yeah. So you just go to CDP's website, or what do you recommend if people want to learn more about it?
HSBC supply chains.
That's to Google if you want to. Can you hear me? No. Yeah. Sorry. So now it's over to the panel discussion. So Dominic, I invite you to come up and then to introduce our panel to take us further.
Okay, let's do it.
So and keep the mic up here.
Thank you. Dearest panel, would you like to kind of progress to the podium? So this is the bit I've been most excited about, I have to say, all week, because to have Avida Schneider Electric, to have Diageo, and to have Amazon talk to us in kind of very real terms with these lovely folks about how we tackle this is going to be super interesting, because you've all got really cool initiatives that you are leveraging, are building, are part of, and you know what it's like because you're trying to do it, and that's basically the discussion. So if I can maybe start, Kristen, with you, if I can. So you are the Global Director for Sustainability at Diageo. Many of you will know the wonderful company that is Diageo, but probably you won't appreciate exactly how important this challenge is for the company that is yours. So maybe you could sort of sketch that out and kind of what you're finding out and how you're tackling it, because you're relatively about a year into the job. So I mean that's an interesting learning experience as well, I would imagine.
Yes, thanks, Dominic. And as you mentioned, Diageo, many of you will know our brands, Johnny Walker, Guinness, Tanqueray, Baileys. So Don Julio, hopefully you're enjoying this at home and on the road, as it were. And as you mentioned, Dominic, I've been enrolled now about a year. I think that learning curve is very, very steep, as is that learning curve for our suppliers. So as was mentioned in the introduction, our scope 1 and 2 is actually less than 10% of our footprint. So Diageo has set a target to reach net zero in our own operations by 2030. We will invest $1 billion, if not more, to reach that target. But then that's such a small sliver of the remaining of our footprint, right? So how do we actually tackle that rest of that 90%? And what I've found since I've been here, and actually we had a very almost a shotgun approach to our suppliers. We had different people talking to a supplier here and a supplier there. So what we're trying to do now is catalyze action by actually bringing our top 20 suppliers together. And then in March, we'll bring the top 100, maybe even 150 suppliers together to specifically talk about Scope 3. And because, of course, their Scope 1 and 2 and their 3 ladders up into our Scope 3. And so we're trying to also take, similar to the what was just described, is how do we share those best practices from the suppliers. So we're working with a few now to understand what is it that they're doing. We're finding some of the best suppliers who are on that trajectory already, and then we'll be able to share those best practices so that hopefully we can create some kind of momentum and eventually potentially reach scale.
That's quite amazing. Has that sort of been done before? And the Azure suppliers kind of like, oh really? You want to bring us together? What are you going to question us on? What's our homework?
Well, it's never been done before. So it's very, very exciting for us. And interestingly, when we approached the CEO to speak at it, she said, "You're doing what?" You know, and so almost to your point earlier, because it is interesting when with supply chain experts, when we're sustainability experts, we've got a certain nomenclature and approach. But the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, they're not naturally on board with our agenda. So actually there was a question on why are you doing this? And we had to present the business case. And actually now it has been adopted and they are really excited to see what we can do. So it's never been done before. And we are working with a few external EY, HSBC, a few others to get the insights to even support with some data when the suppliers then are approaching us and working with us at the supplier conference in March.
Super interesting. I can only imagine the internal meetings with like your head of procurement or something like, you know, this is what we should do. Like, but these are my people. You know, these are my contracts. Kind of my relationships.
Well, and as you can appreciate, the head of procurement is all about cash and cost, and then I come in and say and carbon. We need to add a third C to that conversation. So it's not always straightforward.
Fascinating. Well, that's a good opener. Lisa, if I can turn to you. Lisa, you're the Global VP of, I didn't realize it, but Aviva as part of Schneider Electric, so maybe that would be a good thing to explain as well. But you've got another set of experiences with, I think, over 1,000 or so of suppliers related to your activity, so it'd be wonderful to hear more about that.
Sure. So wonderful to be here with you. So here to share the journey we've been on as Aviva. So we're an industrial software company now owned by Schneider Electric, and we have quite a different experience because, again, we have no physical product. Scope 3 emissions still over 90%. But actually, the really interesting thing is for us, our downstream emissions are 73% of our current footprint, and our upstream emissions are only 23%. 27%. But does that mean that we don't work on this topic? Absolutely not. It was part of making sure that we could decarbonize and get to net zero. But we are very strategic about how we approach it. And you know, we really have to, like everybody in this room, think about, first of all, how we influence the business, but also, and get buy-in, but also use our own resources very judiciously. So the first thing that we did was look at our entire supplier footprint and say, where can we have the biggest impact? Where do we have procurement capacity? And then where do we have business buy-in? Those three things were absolutely key. So I think we need to maybe do a better job on branding what we call the initiative, but we have a supplier, IT supplier engagement program where we knew that we could work with about 25 suppliers representing 40% of our spend. So there was a concentration. We have dedicated capability, and that we were able to actually educate and upskill our procurement teams that work in that one area. And then we had business buy-in to bring this into the renewals discussion. So that, again, it's not something that's happening in isolation, but what we are looking for to achieve in terms of decarbonization is right there at the table when renewals are being discussed. And I think that that's been really key to having success. We've seen about over 30% reduction in our scope 3 emissions related to supply chain for the moment. And, you know, I think, again, you hear business talk a lot about quick wins, because we wanted to find a way that we could get quick wins and then build the learnings to expand this more broadly across our supply chain.
That's super interesting. So that's the upstream suppliers that you brought together. And how did it convert from the kind of meetings to that 30% reduction in emissions? What was it that you were able to convince them to do, or how did you help?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think a lot of the journey has been on making sure that we actually have the right data that I think we've been speaking about. So moving away from actually the estimates that have been provided to actually moving away from spend-based to more product-based emissions. I think it's a journey. I think we're seeing in the tech space, we still need to really work on engagement. I'm glad we have partners here where we can kind of, again, have shared data and then actually have initiatives and collaborations to help reduce them over time.
The Partnership for Carbon Transparency that I briefly referred to has had great partners, including some here. And a first wave of work with 8 or 9 leading companies has illustrated that by applying the carbon product footprint methodology in the data exchange, a 37% improvement in accuracy of upstream Scope 3 emissions with suppliers. And as you were saying, it's quite significant, because then I guess you can start to find your leading suppliers, if I can put it like that, or people that you are very dependent on, but who you need to, their game needs to improve on their carbon footprint, if you like, and sharpen your relationship with them in that way, I guess.
Yeah, completely agree. And I know this leads into kind of a topic we'll talk about later, but again, differentiating between your leaders, your followers, your laggards, and really tailoring your pathway of engagement to each of those different categories is really key. And once you identify your leaders and finding ways to collaborate with them is important.
I know nothing much about procurement in large businesses, but I imagine that this kind of conversation about leaders or laggards, or it's a different kind of way of the folks in the procurement side thinking about the suppliers rather than just the kind of cash piece, which is interesting. Kerry, can we come on to you? So Kerry Constable is now the Global Director of Decarbonization at Amazon. So if you thought your job was challenging, have a coffee with Kerry, because not only is that a kind of, if you like, a linear model, but this is a platform-based business model, which takes us into completely different and interesting territory for this conversation. But many of you probably recognize Kerry from many years of working on kind of climate action with the UN Secretary General's team, 2 action summits, 2014, 2019, and multiple other things besides. So it's fascinating to perhaps even get your reflect. You're, again, relatively new to the job, is it fair to say? So just kind of getting into this, your reflections on what you're finding out and how, best practices and approaches can be helpful.
Yeah, 6 months in, so don't ask me all the numbers, but I know many of them. No, but thanks, Dominic, and it's great to be here. And I mean, supplier engagement is, you can imagine, Amazon has a lot of suppliers, a lot of different types of businesses, and so I mean, one of the reasons I was really excited to join Amazon is it's literally a cut of the real economy when you look at, I mean, it's agriculture, transport, energy, built environment, you name it, we're covering it in terms of hard to abate sectors, and that also means that we're covering a significant number of suppliers, and we have a really an interesting. So we've released a lot about our strategy with suppliers. There are 3 kind of main elements. I mean, one is innovating and partnering with our suppliers, and we're doing a lot, and we can get into that on demand aggregation, demand pooling. So we've developed buyers alliances. We're doing a pulp and paper carbon sequestration project with International Paper, which I can get into. So really innovating and partnering, as co-collaborators on the decarbonization journey. Secondly is then planning and working with our suppliers to both set and disclose targets. And so last year we released our commitment to work with our suppliers, 50% of our highest emitting suppliers, to decarbonize and release their footprints and strategies, and so that is sort of that's our planning dimension and incorporating into our supplier engagement standards, etc. And then the third is actually open sourcing our tools. So what has Amazon learned in terms of our renewable energy procurement playbook? We're the largest corporate clean energy procurer in the world. And there's a lot that we can offer. So we developed something called Amazon Sustainability Exchange last year, which has a slew of resources on how to set a target, how to procure renewable energy, how to procure low emission concrete and steel materials, etc. So increasingly we're releasing more and more playbooks on our site to be able to enable suppliers of all sizes to partner with us on this journey, and increasingly, I mean, as you were mentioning, Dominic, I mean, Amazon suppliers are as vast as you can imagine. They're small businesses and large companies like International Paper, And so the strategies have to be very different, and you have to be very agile. And that's one of the really exciting things, I think, about doing decarbonization strategy at Amazon. Certainly not boring, I would say.
Certainly not boring. So, I mean, but first of all, thank you so much for the kind of openness in those first remarks. We're going to hear a little bit more, I think, about some of these platforms that can help provide best practice knowledge and exchange. And we'll come back for a little bit more of your sort of take on that and maybe drill a little bit into some of the examples or experiences that you're having. But Alex, is it you're good to kind of show us the climate drive? Should we go and sit down again? Okay.
You take a minute. We have heard a lot on the challenges when it comes to decarbonization of suppliers. WBCSD have been working with member companies, 70, on finding solutions on the piece of upskilling and capability building. 2 years back at COP, we launched what we are calling the Climate Drive. So it's an open platform that is meant for multinational companies to bring many of their suppliers on board. You can do, well, many different things to upskill. You can go into physical workshops. You can work one-on-one with very important ones. But if you really want to reach out to a multitude of suppliers, so we heard that we need additional skills. And we didn't want to set up another reporting platform, so it's not at all like another CDP coming up here. No, we started as really like as a defined capability building platform that we are now have the honor to launch today, a new version, so it's now a TCD, the Climate Drive 2.0. That's a team at WBCSD together with our member companies have been working on intensively. So I invite you, if you like to, and many of you already took your mobile phones out. So if you scan the QR code, you can experience it live now later. Here's just one of the screenshots. So we have advanced quite a bit of the functionalities, and I will walk you through. We have now also individual logins where you can create your personalized action plan or your suppliers. We do have a kind of net zero readiness check assessment where companies can see where do we stand against all the requirements, all the initiatives. So it's a very short but still directional guidance, and then you get curated information on what is most helpful to do next. The main feature is an action levers database. So we now have over 100 action levers on the Climate Drive. And that really goes into like, what is it that specifically needs to get done? What are the costs and what is the potential for CO2 abatement? Then if you further browse, you can see there's a net zero guidebook, because especially if you are not a multinational company, so for many of the suppliers who don't have those large teams, to understand what is it really that is requested, that is required. So we put up a concise net zero guidebook that goes you from all the way of how to set a net zero target, how to identify your abatement levers, how to go into action, how to prioritize it internally, how to account for the emissions, how to report on them. So there are 6-7 chapters, how to go beyond your value chain, how to go into voluntary carbon markets. So this is all done with our partners and really providing them a kind of, yes, here's a concise way of doing it. And the third one, as I mentioned, is what we are calling a net zero readiness check. So 40 questions to go. It's safe for each user individually, so it's not published, not at all. It is really meant to be another upskilling tool where companies can then educate their boards of saying like we have seen, we are already pretty strong in the area of identifying what our net zero target would need to be. We are not that strong on how do we really get to a midterm target. So it gives you quite a good indication. Obviously, for many of the people probably in this room here, like the multinational ones, you're way further and farther already. But this is really like, how do you really engage many of your suppliers? So this is where we stand now in terms of numbers. this would not have been possible. Huge thank you to many of our WBCSD member companies. So we have more than 70 member companies. We have been tracking usage, so there are 40,000 users on our platform. We now, in this new version, we have more than 100 best practices that we are going to double over the next month, so going to 200 soon. We are collaborating with the global WBCSD network partners, so we are now available in 6 languages. The insights that got shared on the Climate Drive are from more than 40 multinational companies and service providers. People who are going to the platform, they're coming, as you see here, from 125 companies. And we also do have many ecosystem partners who are working with us. I will give a shout out to all of those later on, but this is in a nutshell what is the Climate Drive 2.0. So this has been built by companies, for companies, and this is also a session to see how do we take it further. And this is how WBCSD works. So it's really like what are the needs. We do not want to replicate what is already there, so we don't need this one. But we see there are options where we can invite you to think through, to come and to engage with Dominic, with myself, with our team, if there's something in for you. So you can see there are four options. So the first one, which is an obvious one, use the Climate Drive for your suppliers. It's an open platform. Anyone can go there and can access it. So you can send your suppliers there. You can, if you want, you can incentivize it a bit in your procurement practices. You may not, but it's an easy win, right? It's a quick win of saying, like, have you completed, have you worked through, have you done your net zero readiness check, what did you find, and then take it further if you're getting into supplier engagement. You can see if you want to connect your solution, your platform, to the Climate Drive for all the solution providers that are out there, and there's many tools out there. Like, I think I would love to see, like, what is a more generic abatement cost curve generator being freely hosted on the Climate Drive. So which gives companies an initial indication of, okay, this is how it looks like. Here are the ones who give you a positive business case if you're implementing them, and here's the abatement costs if you're coming to levers which are more intense to implement. So solution providers, anything that we feel may make really good sense, and if you're up for it to partner, we are very open to it. For business practitioners, sustainability experts, as I mentioned, like, we currently have more than 40 member companies who are sharing their best practices. So as part of the Climate Drive 2.0, we have also launched an AI-based content generator for case studies, so which makes simplify you to bring in the information that is needed in the format to display on the Climate Drive. We do have a review process to ensure quality, but the input just got much simpler. So therefore, we also hope to further scale the amount of quality content that is on the platform. And then the last one is, what would it take if your own procurement programs got the Climate Drive as white labeled inside your own systems? Because we have talked to many of you in the room, in our membership, of saying, yes, many are also running bespoke, dedicated education platforms, and they always need to keep them up to date. So which can be a pain, and there have been good arguments why a company have set it up individually. But here's our invitation of saying, can we not just join forces, because this is pre-competitive. Here are best cases, best levers. Here's a guidebook. If you like, so we are very open to explore what would a white label, so that it's incorporated into your own system, may look like. So those are the four options on how we see you engaging. And I think that's, for now, a short intro into the Climate Drive on climate upskilling for supplier decarbonization. So I invite back the panel and to see how does it resonate with you, and what are the further capability approaches that you feel may be complementary. So back over to you, Dominic.
Thanks. All right, round two. Thanks, Alex. Brilliant. So we were lucky to snag Alex because you were the global director of climate and environment at BMW. So this is what you had to do from that side of it, and so kind of trying to find people who've been through it to build it. We were very lucky with AB InBev and Unilever. And you saw some of the others who said we want something, and this probably resonates, I think, with all three of you. Something that is not kind of another little kind of black boxy thing, but a platform thing, because once you start it, people can then either put their things on it or take from it, and the more you get, the more there is. And this whole training capacity seems to be like a really big deal. I mean, you all mentioned it in one shape or form or others, and how do you find your top 40 suppliers, or what kind of toolkits would there be, or how did somebody else do all of those sorts of things. And it's one of those things you never know, because we launched it at Sharm el Sheikh COP, was that 2 years ago? Would like one person show up and the whole thing would collapse and die in about, and it hasn't. So it's a pretty interesting journey, and it links to something called the SME Climate Hub, which we mean business run. So that's for small companies, less than 500 people. This is for more than 500, up to the scale of your operations. But also the climate champions have launched an SME supplier campaign. And so we're very pleased to kind of link it to that. So it's one of those things we're sort of trying to connect it into an ecosystem and hopefully becomes a tool. So that's allowing you a chance to think a little bit. But I guess the question is, as you're going about your work in these topics, and you explained a little bit in the first part of the discussion, what's kind of useful for you? What would be kind of cool information to find, or things that you would like to discover that would help you as you're trying to figure out how to do this in your shop? Because I think that might resonate with some of the audience listening here and would help in that kind of, okay, so should we have more of that stuff on this? So it's a pretty open question, but the experiences that all three of you have looking into this and having kind of worked on it, I think are extremely valuable. So any insights like that would be great. I'll give you one, just to keep the flavor going. Something that we were surprised about, because we thought it would be like technical, and here's a spider's web of where you are in relation to your sector, but the just transition bit has come through really strongly. And we were like, of course, but didn't expect that. So now we're scrabbling around trying to find good examples of how people have taken the social part of this journey on, which is a really interesting development which we hadn't thought about. So that's something that popped up. But maybe, I don't know, Kristen, could we start with you and work in the same order again? Would that be okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. And actually, I was going to start with something technical, which is maybe a little cleaner data. And I think it's always like, how do we find the right kind of data that helps us to know what the insights are so we can learn from them, build on them, share them with others. I think similarly, just understanding what others' needs are. So even across our panel, I've learned something this morning and thinking about how do I connect in, because in this space, the only way we're going to address Scope 3 is through those collaborations and partnerships, because none of us can do this alone. And you mentioned AB InBev. We've launched partnerships with AB InBev, with Heineken, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, a lot of other food businesses to try to help our suppliers, right? How do we get to the farmers level? And so I would say there's that, let's understand each other's needs so we can connect that spider web of collaboration in order to support our entire supply chain. And then how do we also understand the suppliers' needs so then we can also address those. But I suppose the other angle I would take when you say non-technical, we're also struggling ever so slightly to understand how we implement the nature-based solutions to address this space, right? So how do we actually embed, you're talking about just and the social, but also there's this other element in the environment side that I think is a little bit tougher to nut to crack.
It's so interesting. So is that the Refresh initiative that you were referring to?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. The Refresh Alliance. It's here today. Sign up.
Cool. And then, of course, I guess when you say, water is a big deal, right, for Diageo. So I suppose information or best practices or things like that on those sorts of topics.
Yes, water is, as you can appreciate with the kinds of products we're selling, it is by far our most important ingredient, incredibly vital. We have a pledge to replenish as much water as we use, whilst also trying to be as efficient as we can within our own operations. And yet there's still so much we can learn in order to try to address and support the communities where we're operating, to replenish appropriately. And again, we do that primarily through partnerships like WWF, TNC, and others.
And of course, CDP, you've got quite a cool water disclosure platform. So these are the sorts of things, saying about connecting some of these dots. So there's a way in to find all of this information. I don't know, from your experience, kind of the things that you think, oh, if only I would had, when I started this journey, if there was somewhere I could have gone to find X, Y, Z. What's been your experience or reflections on that?
Yes, it's been, it's a fantastic tool. I think we found it very helpful, even the questionnaire, especially for that group that's less mature and needs to decide the checklist, sort of which pathway to go down, which resources are going to be more helpful. We've used it that way. I think the other thing that we've really found, just to upskill our procurement teams, because there's so many exciting examples of what other people are doing. So we've been able to, again, that's been a big focus for us. I think what's next is really what you were talking a little bit about. One of the things they did bring up was the fact, how does climate and then everything that we're doing on the human rights angle all fit together as procurement? And so I think that ties to just transition. I think again, internal collaboration and coordination is so important. I know we're talking out to suppliers, and I think that's covered. But we have to align internally with the business leaders, with procurement, now with legal. So just continuing to have very tailored pathways for those different internal functions within a company, I think is really important. And the work that you're talking about on the green window, which I really hope from an antitrust standpoint, any resources that can continue to be built into the platform so that we can have those discussions with our own legal teams would be really helpful.
It's super insightful. Our friends from Baker McKinsey are kind of helping. It's such a delicate one, right? And particularly in the US context. But something needs to give on that, because we can't, on the one hand, have a whole conversation about collaboration. I mean, Diageo and AB InBev, I mean, some legal folks have a field day with that, unless there is a technical green window that allows that to happen for whatever global good. And I really like the piece that you said, Lisa. We're hearing it again and again. It's not just a sort of set of technical tools for externally, but the language set one uses to navigate this internally. Across different functional heads and departments. We launched something, you might have seen it, it was the Business Leader's Guide to Adaptation, which basically has a functional role for all the different board members to take on adaptation and resilience, because again, we had kind of friends from our company saying, we know it's really important, we know the resilience agenda, but I cannot get this message across to procurement, to legal, to CFO. And that was launched at the World Bank Spring meetings, I think, Alex, wasn't it? That it's one of our most, after the climate drive, it's one of our most downloaded things, which, again, to sort of load the adaptation resilience piece in. The trouble is sometimes, though, Kerry, I don't know, like where do you draw the line? Because suddenly, there's so much, right? And I'm sort of maybe appreciating the challenge that you have ahead of you. Like, I mean, how to sort of, I guess, focus on a win or find, some information or quick win territory in a tool that can help navigate that in terms of what others have done, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's and look, it's as Amazon is an ever evolving company, and our decarbonization strategy is ever evolving literally on a daily basis, which is why it's quite exciting and not boring. I think a few different things. I think there's. And how we look at it is, one, size of emissions. So we have identified the highest emitting and announced a public commitment to ensure that we're partnering and that we're asking those suppliers to set targets, et cetera. And then increasingly we're looking at the sectoral dimension. So how can we support our suppliers against different sectors. So international paper is one example where we're working together on a carbon sequestration project, and that, and so looking at different sectors and seeing how can we bulk our support and again demand pool, et cetera, to really procure some of the hardest to abate technologies and spur those markets. And so there's a lot, that can be done and should be done on a sectoral basis. What I would say is that, so we also are a funder of SME Climate Hub, and I think one of the aspects that is tricky, especially with the smallest suppliers, is translating this. I think we all speak climate, this climate lingo, and we've been speaking it for I don't know, 25 years myself, for better or for worse, and then how do you actually make it real for companies that are that have 300 people and are selling on Amazon and really excited to sell on Amazon, but don't scope. They're not talking about scopes 1, 2, and 3, in the way that we are every day. And so I think that translation to really normal language, I think we all would we would certainly welcome a lot more collaboration there. I think SME Climate Hub does a wonderful job, but I think we do need to, probably as a community, frankly, start to translate this nomenclature into, and these targets into, what makes sense and what are fair to ask, and for the smallest companies in the world that have where climate isn't the first challenge, where frankly survival and business survival is the first challenge. So I think more resources there, and what is a science-based target? What does that look like? What does disclosure look like? What should it look like? On that pathway, knowing that it's not the number one priority. Survival is the number one priority for growing businesses, and so that's something that we constantly talk about internally, and I think it would be helpful about more as a climate community working on supplier.
Really, really interesting. The link to the SME, or even like middle-sized, let alone small, like kind of, really, I have to do this. You're pressuring me as a supplier, but I've got no bandwidth to do it. I'm just selling you stuff, so like get over it. But actually putting that into the language of here's a winning ticket, and here's how we have a loyalty now. If you're kind of being a leader in that space, but the other piece that you just said is I think super interesting. This kind of whole language area of just somewhere that doesn't jargon me up, but explains it in reasonably simple terms and in different languages as well. Which was, I don't know if you noticed, one of the things was everybody said, don't just do this in English, please, but here's Japanese or Spanish, or even we're going to have Indonesian on there and such like that. And of course, lost in translation, I mean, like a science-based target or scope, all of that to make it really, really carefully, kind of, so it sails through, different language barriers. I think so. All of those sorts of things. All right. So this is a rapid hour to kind of get you interested and excited about finding more about kind of what these folks are up to, and others working on this and through this tool. But we have a combination of been at it for some time, been at it for a year, and taking a look and kind of leaning in. Any kind of advice to people who are listening and think, well, it's all right for you because you're like really big companies and you're really expert, and I'm secretly listening to this, not quite sure what questions to ask or where to start, but I know I've got to do it. Any kind of thoughts to the folks who are listening on those topics? Maybe Kristen?
Yeah, happy to say that there's no such thing as a stupid question. We've heard that a lot. I felt like I asked a lot of stupid questions myself in my first year. And to the point on nomenclature, I mean, we love in the climate space, the sustainability, we love all of our acronyms. And joining a company like Diageo has a whole other set of acronyms, right? So I remember trying to figure out and translate all that, and such an excellent point. So for us, just ask questions and ask other people questions, because together is the way we can actually move forward more progressively.
I think, tools are great, data sharing key, But one real learning for me on this whole supplier space is the importance of relationships and people. And sometimes we've had certain roadblocks until we've brought in the right people, and that's by understanding the relationships with that supplier across the company and who's the right person to have the conversation to move things forward. So just would go back to people relationships really, really matter in this space. It's hard work, so make sure you're fully leveraging that to be successful.
I'd say really make sure the best interest of your suppliers. Make it attractive. I think it's hard. It's hard, and for especially for SMEs, it's hard, and so you really want to appeal to the person and to the company and to the. I think in addition, look at the geographic diversity, and tailor your approaches to different parts of the world. I think there a lot of supplier engagement strategies may have started in North America or in Europe, but really need to be. I mean, many of our suppliers are in Asia and APAC, and is the approach different? Yes, it will be different because the business practices are different, because languages are different, and so really make sure that you're putting your customer first and your supplier first. I think that is, and that's something that we're trying to do every day.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's like kind of 3 MBAs all at once there, in terms of kind of the real experience of getting into it and doing it. Just give us a little round of applause for such a fabulous panel and trusting and sharing their insights. Thank you so much. I think we can migrate down to the chairs. And Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Lisa, Carrie, Christine. So this brings us to the last slide. A massive thanks to everyone who have been with us on this journey on the climate drive. So you can see here, so we got thanks to Women Business, Climate Works, seed funders getting us going, academic partner with Oxford, knowledge partner, BCG, Carbon Trust. McKinsey also supported us a lot in the first year to get us really going. We have global network partners, so this also was, as we were discussed, if we would only offer information in English, we wouldn't get anywhere. So we are very thankful to our partners who have been with us here from Brazil, from Spain, from Turkey, from Taiwan, China, from Indonesia. We have our ecosystem partners, Race to Zero, Scope 3 Peer Group, Dominic already mentioned, the SME Climate Hub, the Solar Impulse Foundation. And then we do have our member companies at WBCSD. So you can see here, 70 companies have been involved over the past, 3 years, because the first year we need to build it, then yes, in Charm we launched the initial version, and now we are here of saying now let's get us going into the next steps. So thank you for being here with us. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you, Manvir, for kicking us off. It's to remind all of us, it's Thursday, right? So we were always wondering, where are we? It's Thursday. It's the investment day, finance day, trade day at COP. Thanks for joining us here. Thanks for listening to us online. If you're here, the coffee is great. If you need to sneak to your next session, here's a way where you should stop and take the coffee. And yes, have a productive day. Thank you.